He walked in for a quiet meal, but left humiliated in front of a full diner. When Keanu Reeves was denied service without warning, he had every reason to fight back. Instead, what he did next didn't just stun the staff, it transformed the entire town. And no one, not even Keanu, saw it coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain had stopped just minutes before his tires crunched across the gravel parking lot. A pale strip of sunlight struggled to cut through the clouds, casting a silver sheen over puddles near the curb. Keanu Reeves sat behind the wheel of his rented SUV, watching the neon sign in the window flicker. Open. He was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that didn't just sit in the body, but in the bones. After 12 hours of filming stunts in the Oregon woods, all he wanted was something simple, something warm, something like home. His mother used to make meatloaf on rainy days, mashed potatoes on the side, buttered peas, and a single slice of cornbread that never made it to the fridge. He hadn't tasted that combination in years, but the moment he passed the faded sign out front, Ruby Pines Diner, home cooking. Since 1954, he felt something stir. He turned off the ignition, took a breath, and stepped out into the cool evening air. Inside, the bell above the door jingled gently as he walked in. The smell of sizzling onions and freshly brewed coffee wrapped around him. It was comforting. Soft country music hummed through dusty ceiling speakers. The booths were nearly full truckers, a couple of older couples, and a group of teenagers crowding a corner table with milkshakes and fries. A young waitress glanced up from the counter, her hazel eyes lighting up as she recognized him. She looked barely out of college, hair tucked into a loose braid, apron tied awkwardly like she was still getting used to it. "Welcome to Ruby Pines. Sit wherever you'd like." Keanu nodded and chose the booth by the window, the one farthest from the door. He slid in, leaned back, and picked up the laminated menu. His eyes moved across the page, landing on the daily special. Grandma's meatloaf with mashed potatoes and gravy. A smile touched his lips. He didn't need to read anything else. The waitress, her name tag read Talia, brought over a glass of water and a napkin. Her hands trembled slightly as she set them down. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, maybe?" "That would be perfect, thanks," he said, voice soft and warm. As Talia turned toward the coffee machine, a woman emerged from the kitchen. Tall, lean, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a sharp bun. She wore a stained apron and carried a towel over her shoulder. Her eyes landed on Keanu and froze. There was no mistaking her reaction. A tightening of the jaw, a subtle flare in the nostrils, a flicker of something sharper than surprise. Anger? Disgust? She turned toward Talia quickly and called her over with a clipped, "Can I see you for a moment?" Talia blinked, but obeyed. She set down her notepad and walked toward the kitchen, glancing once over her shoulder. Keanu watched quietly, unsure what was happening. From behind the counter, voices lowered to whispers. But even whispers carry weight when the room is quiet enough to notice them. And one by one, customers began to do just that notice. He didn't move, he just waited. Talia stood stiffly beside Marla, the diner's owner. As the woman's voice cut low and sharp, Marla's eyes were locked on Keanu, though she tried to speak through clenched teeth. "You didn't recognize him, did you?" Marla asked. Talia hesitated. Yeah, I think so. That's Keanu Reeves. I wasn't sure, but..." Marla shook her head in frustration. "I know exactly who he island, and I don't want him eating here," she said, louder than she meant to. Talia looked stunned. "What? Why?" Marla crossed her arms. "Because I saw that movie of his, the one where he played the assassin. The violence, the message, everything about it. I don't want people like that in my place. Not today. Not ever." Talia blinked, confused. "But that was just a movie. He's not..." "I don't care," Marla snapped. "This is my business, my decision. I'm not serving him. By now, the whispers had drawn the attention of the room. The group of teens had stopped slurping their milkshakes. A couple near the jukebox exchanged confused glances. Even the cook in the back had peeked out from the kitchen pass-through. Marla adjusted her apron and stepped out from behind the counter. Talia followed reluctantly, clutching the coffee pot in one hand and her notepad in the other, as if trying to hold on to some sense of normalcy. Keanu looked up as they approached. His face was calm. "Patient. I'm sorry," Marla began, her voice firm and deliberate. "But I can't serve you here." There was a pause, a breath that caught in the middle of the room. Keanu looked at her, unsure he'd heard correctly. "Excuse me? I know who you are," Marla continued. "And I don't agree with what you represent. Your films glorify violence. They send the wrong message. I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves, but I don't feel comfortable serving you." The room went still. Keanu sat there for a moment, eyes resting on hers, searching for something: anger, fear, conviction. But what he found was something harder. A wall already built. He could have said a dozen things. He could have reminded her that she was making a public scene, that she was rejecting a customer for no other reason than a misunderstanding of his work, that her logic didn't hold up. Instead, he folded the menu gently and placed it back in the holder. "I understand," he said quietly. "It's your place, your choice." Marla blinked. She had expected a fight, an argument, something she could justify. But Keanu simply stood, picked up his jacket, and gave a small nod. "Thank you for your honesty." He turned toward the door. The bell jingled again as he stepped into the evening air, leaving behind stunned silence. A few customers shifted in their seats, unsure of what had just happened. Talia stared at the door, still holding the untouched coffee pot, her chest tight with something she didn't quite know how to name. Talia stood frozen near the register, still gripping the warm coffee pot in both hands. The silence in the diner felt unnatural, like someone had pressed pause on the world. Conversations didn't resume. Forks hung in midair. The air felt heavy, uncertain. Marla, still standing near Keanu's empty booth, cleared her throat and forced a smile toward the room. "Okay, folks, let's keep things moving. Who needs coffee?" Her voice cracked slightly, but she covered it with forced cheer. "Talia, you can finish up table 3. Talia didn't move. She wasn't sure what bothered her more: the way Marla had dismissed him, or the way Keanu had accepted it without the slightest trace of resentment. He hadn't fought back. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded anything. He just left. As Talia slowly made her way back to the counter, she stole a glance through the front window. The SUV was still parked out front. Keanu hadn't driven away yet. He sat in the front seat, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes cast downward. What was he thinking? A customer at the counter broke the silence. An older man with grease-stained hands and a name patch that read Clyde. "Marla," he said gruffly, "you sure about what you just did?" Marla turned. "I don't need advice on how to run my business." "I didn't say you did," Clyde replied. "But that was Keanu Reeves. Not some hotshot celebrity. He's one of the good ones." Marla sighed and waved him off. "You all can believe what you want. I know what I saw in those movies. It's not what we need more of in this world." Talia finally set the coffee pot back on the warmer and returned to her side of the counter, her stomach twisted. It wasn't about the movies. Not really. She remembered the way Keanu had smiled at her when she offered him coffee. The softness in his voice. The way he had quietly thanked Marla even after she turned him away. Whatever her boss believed, that man hadn't brought violence. He brought calm. And now, he was gone. The next half hour passed in a blur. Orders came in, plates went out. The bell jingled again and again as new customers arrived, unaware of what had just happened. But for those who had witnessed it, something hung in the air, unspoken and unresolved. By the time the evening rush slowed and Talia slipped off her apron to begin wiping tables, Keanu's car had disappeared from the lot. No fanfare, no spotlight, just a quiet exit into the deepening dusk. She wiped down the booth where he had sat, taking extra care to clean the laminated menu he'd gently replaced. A faint coffee ring marked the table. Talia paused, and for the first time that night, She whispered aloud so quietly it barely counted as sound. "I think we made a mistake." Keanu didn't start the engine. The lights from the diner still glowed behind him, casting soft reflections across the windshield. He sat with both hands resting on the steering wheel, unmoving. The inside of the SUV was quiet, save for the low hum of the defroster and the occasional tap of water dripping from the roof onto the glass. He blinked slowly, his breath steady. Not shallow, not angry, just quiet. His stomach still growled, but it wasn't what sat heaviest in his chest. What lingered wasn't the hunger, it was the moment. The way her words had landed, deliberate and cold. Not curious, not cautious, just final. He didn't blame her. He had learned long ago that people see what they want to see. Sometimes they mistake the role for the man. Sometimes the assumptions go deeper than that. He leaned back in the seat and looked up at the ceiling of the SUV. A memory flickered. He was 7 years old, sitting outside a school counselor's office, knees pulled to his chest. His mother had just been told by the school staff that Keanu had trouble adjusting. He was too quiet, too distant. "We're not sure he's fitting in," the counselor had said. He hadn't done anything wrong. He just hadn't known how to speak their language. Not just words, he spoke differently, thought differently, walked differently. And that had been enough for the door to close. Even back then, the feeling hadn't changed much. Only now, the doors were restaurant booths, and the judgments came from people he'd never even met. Keanu sat with that memory for a moment longer, letting it pass like a wave. He reached toward the center console, picked up his phone, and unlocked it. He didn't open social media. He didn't draft a post. He didn't reach for a platform. He opened his contacts and scrolled down to a name saved simply as Grant, Project H. It rang twice. Then a voice came through, calm and familiar. "You okay?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He glanced at the diner through the rearview mirror. The lights inside still glowed softly. Someone was mopping the floor. Talia, maybe. "Yeah," he said finally. "Just had a strange moment." "Bad press?" "Number, nothing public. I walked into a diner and got turned away." The line went quiet for a beat. Then Grant asked, "Because they recognized you?" "Yeah, but not the way you'd think. The owner, she said she couldn't serve me because of something I represented, something in a film." Another pause. "Did you leave?" I thanked her, and I left. Grant exhaled. "You want me to reach out? We could talk to someone local, smooth it over." Keanu shook his head. "Number. That's not why I'm calling." He sat forward, fingers tapping lightly against the leather steering wheel. "I think I've found a place," he said quietly, "that needs kindness." Grant didn't respond right away. He knew Keanu well enough to recognize the shift in his voice, low, deliberate, with that distant tone he only used when something had struck him deep. Not in anger, but in conviction. "What kind of place?" Grant asked gently. Keanu let out a breath. "Small diner out near Oak Ridge. Old neon sign. Worn leather booths. Place smells like home." He paused. "She looked at me like I was something broken, something dangerous. She doesn't know who you are." "Doesn't matter," Keanu said. She believed it. That was enough. Grant hesitated. "So, why are we talking about it?" Keanu looked again at the building behind him, still glowing in the dark, like a little pocket of warmth he'd been asked to step out of. "Because it reminded me of something my mother used to say," he murmured. Grant waited. "She used to tell me that people build their walls out of pain, out of things they can't explain. And sometimes, the only way through is to knock gently." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Grant spoke. "So, what are you thinking?" Keanu smiled faintly. "I'm thinking we knock." He could almost hear Grant's eyebrows rising through the phone. "You want to do something?" "I want to do something quiet," Keanu said. "Something kind. No media, no attention." "You want to donate anonymously?" "Not money," Keanu replied. "At least, not yet. I want to learn first." I want to understand what this place is holding back, what it's afraid of. Grant clicked his tongue thoughtfully. We've got the community fund still set aside from the foundation, and I've been talking to local development partners in the Pacific Northwest. You want me to put this diner on our radar? Keanu nodded to himself. Yes, I want to know what they really need. The kind of help they'd never ask for. And you're sure this is the place? I don't know yet, he admitted. But something about it, I don't think the story's finished. Grant's voice softened. You always say that when your gut is telling you something. Keanu didn't deny it. Outside, the wind picked up. A gust stirred the puddles near the sidewalk. The flickering open sign cast red shadows over the gravel lot. Grant asked one more time, "So what do you want me to do?" Keanu looked into the mirror, saw the faint reflection of the booth, where he had almost Saturday, where a meal never came. But a message did. Let's give them a reason to believe again. Grant's voice was quiet. Got it. Keanu ended the call. Then he set the phone down beside him, took one more look at the glowing windows behind him, and finally turned the key in the ignition. The engine purred softly as the headlights cut across the misty lot. Keanu didn't rush. He sat there a moment longer, watching the rain start again in light streaks across the windshield. Everything about the evening had quieted. The air, the town, even his own mind. He didn't feel bitter, just reflective, aware. He'd experienced worse. Studios that didn't believe in him. Directors who passed him over. Reviewers who labeled him a blank slate. He was used to being misunderstood. But this felt different not because of what was said, but because of where it happened. A small-town diner should have been safe ground, universal, apolitical, a place where everyone was equal in their hunger. That's what made it sting not personally, but spiritually. The loss of something sacred, the warmth of the ordinary turned cold for no good reason. He shifted into reverse, slowly backing out of the space, careful not to splash the edge of the walkway. As he pulled onto the road, he passed the front windows one last time. Inside, he saw the young waitress Talia cleaning his empty booth. Her movements were slow, deliberate, her shoulders slightly hunched. She looked up for just a second and caught a glimpse of his car. Their eyes didn't quite meet, but something passed between them in that fraction of a second. Not guilt, not apology, something quieter, recognition. Keanu gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he drove on. He didn't go far. 2 blocks down, he pulled into an empty parking lot outside a closed gas station. He parked again, turned off the engine, and sat with the silence. The road stretched ahead, dark and quiet. He opened the center console and pulled out a small black notebook. Pages bent at the corners, some stained with coffee, others holding scribbled thoughts from hotel rooms and airport lounges. He flipped to a blank page. At the top, he wrote in slow, careful print, Oak Ridge, Ruby Pine Steiner. Underneath that, he wrote, Rejected with dignity, no hate. Then paused and wrote, Talia, waitress. Young, kind eyes, shaken. His pen hovered again. Then he wrote one more line. Let's begin here. He closed the notebook and placed it gently back in the console. He didn't know what exactly would come next, only that this was the kind of place that needed something. Not a handout, not a spectacle, but presence, quiet help, gentle change. He turned the key again, the SUV humming to life once more. As he pulled out onto the 2-lane road heading west, the clouds began to break above the horizon. A faint glow of moonlight spread across the wet pavement ahead. He wasn't sure what he'd return to in this town, but he knew he would return. The staircase creaked under Talia's feet as she climbed to the 3rd floor, each step heavier than the last. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet, reheated soup, and cigarette smoke from the neighbor down the hall. She shifted her bag onto one shoulder and reached into her pocket for the key, fumbling in the dark as the overhead light flickered. The door opened with a soft click. Inside, the apartment was warm, dim, and quiet. A small lamp glowed in the corner of the living room. next to the worn recliner where Lucille sat with a quilt over her legs and a book folded in her lap. "You're late," Lucille said gently, looking up over her reading glasses. Talia closed the door behind her, dropped her bag by the entryway, and kicked off her shoes. "Yeah, Marla asked me to stay and help with closing." "Another inventory night?" Talia hesitated. "Not exactly." Lucille watched her granddaughter carefully, noting the way she avoided eye contact. Her voice softened. "Did something happen?" Talia walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a bottle of water. She leaned against the counter, unscrewed the cap, then finally spoke. "Keanu Reeves came into the diner tonight." Lucille blinked. "The actor?" Talia nodded. Lucille set her book aside and shifted forward. "What on earth was he doing here?" "I don't know," Talia said. "He was quiet, humble, just walked in alone and sat down by the window. I gave him a menu and asked if he wanted coffee. And?" Talia looked down at the floor. "Marla saw him and pulled me aside. She said she wasn't comfortable serving him, said his movies glorify violence or something. Then she walked over and told him to leave." Lucille was silent. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just thanked her for being honest, folded the menu, and walked out. Still, Lucille didn't respond. Talia crossed the room and sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. It was awful. Everyone in the diner heard, and he just left. Lucille let the moment stretch. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. "Some people carry storms inside them," she said. "Others become the shelter." Talia looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" Lucille's eyes were steady. He could have reacted with fire, but he didn't. He chose calm. "That tells you something." "I felt ashamed," Talia whispered, standing there beside Marla while she told him he wasn't welcome. "I didn't say anything. I just froze." Lucille reached across the quilt and gently took her granddaughter's hand. "Sometimes doing nothing feels like safety," she said, "but afterward it feels like regret." Talia felt her throat tighten. "I don't know if we did the right thing," she said softly. Lucille gave her hand a squeeze. "Then maybe next time, you'll know what to do." Talia leaned her head back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. The old fan overhead spun slowly, casting long shadows on the walls. Somewhere in the apartment above them, a dog barked once and went quiet. Lucille let the silence breathe before speaking again. "You know, when I was teaching, there was a boy in my class who never spoke. Not once. For months." Talia turned her head. "What happened?" "Most of the other teachers said he was disrespectful or slow, but I didn't think so. There was something in the way he listened. He was always watching, always thinking." Lucille smiled softly. "Eventually, after many weeks, I asked him to help me clean the chalkboard after class. No pressure, just quiet company. After a while, he started to hum a tune his mother used to sing," he said. "That was the first thing he ever told me." Talia listened, her eyes wet. Lucille continued. "People like that, people who are quiet, who hold the weight of the world on their backs, they notice everything. And when they choose kindness, real kindness, not the kind that expects applause, it's the most powerful thing their island." Talia nodded slowly. "That's what it felt like he saw everything and forgave it anyway." Lucille looked at her granddaughter carefully. "So what will you do with that feeling?" Talia shrugged, voice quiet. "I don't know. I still need the job." Lucille's expression didn't change. "You don't need to throw stones to build a better house. But you do need to look at the foundation." Talia gave a soft, breathy laugh. "You're always speaking in riddles." Lucille tilted her head. "Maybe. Or maybe I just trust you to make sense of things in your own time." They sat in the warmth of the living room for a few more minutes, the quiet stretching between them like a blanket. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights casting shifting shapes across the window blinds. Talia finally stood. "I should get some sleep. Morning shift tomorrow." Lucille nodded. "Did you eat?" "I grabbed a banana at the diner. Not hungry." Lucille didn't push. She just reached over and patted the couch cushion beside her. "Come give your old grandma a hug before bed." Talia crossed the room and leaned in, hugging Lucille gently. Her grandmother held her tighter than usual. "You've got a good heart," Lucille whispered. "Don't let the world make you doubt it." Talia closed her eyes, letting the words settle in deep. As she moved toward her bedroom, she paused in the hallway. From where she stood, she could see the soft outline of the coffee pot in her memory, the booth he never got to sit in, the way he had simply smiled and said, "Thank you." And she wondered again if silence had been the wrong choice. Talia closed her bedroom door behind her and stood in the darkness for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the building settling around her. Pipes creaked. A neighbor coughed. Somewhere outside, a siren passed far off in the night. She changed into her oversized sleep shirt and sat down on the edge of her twin bed, resting her elbows on her knees. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, an unread text from her classmate Alina reminding her about an early study group tomorrow. But Talia didn't open it. She was still thinking about that moment, the quiet, the shame. She pulled the covers back and climbed into bed, switching off the small lamp beside her. The room went still. In the darkness, memories flickered like shadows on the ceiling. Keanu's face calm, unbothered, but not detached. She remembered the way he had looked at Marla, not with anger, but with a quiet kind of sadness, a disappointment that didn't need words. He had seen her, seen all of them, and he had walked away without making anyone feel small. That was what haunted her now. Not the rejection itself, but the way he had responded to it. Without judgment, without vengeance. That wasn't weakness. That was strength she didn't yet understand. Talia turned onto her side and pulled the covers closer around her. She wished she had said something. Anything. Even just, "I'm sorry." But she hadn't. And now, he was gone. She stared at the faint light, creeping through the gap in the blinds. Moonlight curved over the floor like spilled milk. It made everything look softer, gentler, like a different world lived just beyond her reach. Lucille's voice echoed in her thoughts. Some people carry storms inside them. Others become the shelter. She didn't want to be the storm, but she also wasn't sure she had what it took to be the shelter. Not yet. The idea of walking into the diner tomorrow, of seeing Marla again, made her chest tighten. There would be no mention of what had happened. Not from Marla, not from anyone. The world would keep turning. But something inside Talia knew she wouldn't forget. And somehow, she had a feeling that the story of what happened tonight wasn't over. She turned on her side again and reached out to pull the thin curtain fully closed. The moon disappeared. The room went darker. The only sound left was the rhythmic rise and fall of Lucille's breathing from the other room, and Talia, curled up in bed, whispering a quiet promise to no one but herself. "If he ever comes back, I'll say something." The first thing Talia noticed as she turned the corner onto Main Street was the crowd. At first, she thought maybe something was wrong. A car accident, a water line break, maybe even a fire. But as she walked closer to Ruby Pine's diner, still rubbing the sleep from her eyes and tugging her jacket tighter against the morning chill, her steps began to slow. There were people standing on the sidewalk, huddled in loose groups. Some were sipping coffee from gas station cups. Others were bundled in hoodies, checking their phones. A few had folding chairs. Folding chairs. It was 6:10 a.m. The diner didn't open until 6:30. Talia stopped completely and blinked. Then she checked her watch again. The sun hadn't even fully risen, just a soft gray blush above the trees. She recognized a few locals, regulars who normally came in for breakfast around 7 or 8. But there were also unfamiliar faces. Tourists, number outsiders maybe, but not exactly the tourist type. A woman in a red flannel coat turned toward her. "Hey, do you work here?" Talia nodded slowly. "Yeah, why?" The woman smiled. "We heard this is the place Keanu Reeves mentioned." Before Talia could reply, another man cut in. "He posted about it last night. said the food smelled like home. What? The woman pulled out her phone and scrolled. It's going viral. Hundreds of shares. I think someone grabbed a shot of him out front too. Talia's heart kicked up as she moved past them toward the diner entrance. She fumbled with her keys and let herself in quickly, locking the door behind her as the crowd shifted closer to the windows. Inside, everything looked the same. The neon signs still buzzed. Smell of coffee still lingered faintly from the pot she'd left running during cleanup last night. But something had changed. The energy. She took off her coat and made her way to the back to flip the lights and grab her apron. Before she could tie the straps behind her back, the side door burst open. "Talia!" Marla's voice rang out, frantic. Talia turned as her boss came rushing in, clutching her phone and looking like she hadn't slept. Her bun was lopsided and her shirt was untucked. "Have you seen this?" Marla asked, shoving the screen toward her. Talia stared at it. A tweet, simple, clean, and unmistakably real. Wasn't served, but the smell of the food reminded me of home. Support local anyway. KR. Below it was a photo. Keanu's car. The outside of the diner. And in the window, clear as day, her own silhouette behind the counter. What? Why would he say that? Marla asked, her voice rising. Talia didn't answer. She was still staring at the words. Wasn't served. Smelled like home. Support local anyway. Marla paced the narrow kitchen, phone still clutched in her hand like it might explode. "Do you think he's mocking us?" she said. "I mean, why would he tell people to come here after I told him to leave?" Talia stood by the coffee machine, pouring fresh grounds into the filter, hands shaking slightly. "It doesn't sound mocking," she said softly. Marla turned. "You don't think this is a setup? That he's trying to make us look bad?" Talia looked down. He didn't look like someone trying to make anyone look bad. Marla opened her mouth to respond, but the bell above the front door rattled. She jumped. "It's locked," Talia reminded her. "But they're definitely waiting." Marla peeked through the blinds and stepped back. "There's more of them now." Talia hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She opened the app and found the post again, reading it carefully. There were no hashtags, no dramatic punctuation, just that single photo and the short message. Still, the replies were exploding. Some users were confused, others inspired. One read, "This is next level grace. Who does this?" Another said, "Only Keanu would get turned away and still boost the place." And then, "I'm taking a road trip. Where's Oak Ridge?" Talia set her phone down, her pulse racing. "Marla," she said slowly, "you might want to check the notifications on the diner's website." "I haven't touched that site in a year," Marla said, still staring out the window. "Exactly." The back door creaked open again, and Danny, one of the part-time servers, stuck her head in. What's going on?" she asked. "There's a camera van parked out front." Marla spun around. "What?" Danny shrugged. "Some guy with a mic just interviewed the couple from table 7. They're outside now with their baby." Marla moved past her in a rush and peeked out the front blinds again. Her mouth opened and closed. "Oh no. What is it?" Talia asked. "Channel 8, Marla whispered. "That's Camden Walsh." Talia looked up sharply. "The local news guy? The one with the perfect hair?" "Yes." "He's walking toward the door." "I thought you said no one cared about our diner," Talia said, unable to hide the note of irony in her voice. Marla glared at her. Now is not the time. There was a soft knock at the door, polite and deliberate. Marla backed away like the glass might shatter. Camden's face appeared through the window, cheerful and polished. He pointed at his watch, then mimed just 2 minutes with his fingers. "No," Marla said quickly. "No cameras inside." Talia wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the window. "Should I open it?" Marla grabbed her arm. "Wait, give it a minute. I need to think." "You may not have a minute," Talia said. Marla paced again, more frantic now. "This is getting out of control. I just wanted a quiet breakfast place, not a media circus. What if this goes national? What if they dig into my past, or the taxes I filed late last year?" Talia blinked. "You filed late taxes?" "That's not the point," Marla snapped. The door rattled again. This time, someone else knocked. Not the reporter, just a woman in a sweater holding her phone up, looking inside hopefully. "We have to open soon," Talia said gently. Marla rubbed her temple. "I can't do this. I don't want to talk to him. Or them." "You don't have to," Talia offered. "Just open the door. Let people eat. You don't owe anyone a statement." "I do owe something," Marla muttered. "I just don't know what yet." At exactly 6:30, Talia walked to the front door, drew in a slow breath, and unlocked it. The bell chimed softly. The woman in the sweater stepped in first, eyes wide, clutching her phone. "Good morning," she said. "We saw his post. Thought we'd come see for ourselves." Talia forced a smile. "Welcome to Ruby Pines. Booth or counter?" Within 5 minutes, nearly every booth was full. The counter stools were next. The bell over the door barely stopped ringing. Talia moved quickly, refilling coffees, scribbling down orders, calling back requests for pancakes and hash browns. Marla stayed behind the counter, stiff and pale, trying to work the register while avoiding every question customers asked about the post. By 6:50, there was a waiting list. Danny had to pull out the extra chairs from storage. By 7:10, Camden Walsh and his cameraman had been seated at the far end of the counter. Talia overheard him ordering the Denver omelet and whispering about camera angles. And through it all, Keanu Reeves did not return. But his presence was everywhere. The smell of bacon, the warmth of the griddle, the way customers looked at the laminated menu like it now held something sacred. Marla finally turned to Talia during a lull, her eyes bloodshot. "I don't understand," she whispered. "He didn't have to do this. He could have ruined me." Talia handed off a plate and looked at her carefully. "Maybe that's why he didn't." Marla shook her head like she couldn't quite absorb the grace of it. "No one's that nice." Talia didn't respond. She wasn't sure she believed it either. But she also couldn't deny what was happening, or the feeling in her chest that something had shifted. Not just in the diner, in her, in all of them. And as she looked around at the full tables, the warm plates, and the hum of strangers drawn in by a single quiet act of kindness, she realized this was only the beginning. The next morning, the crowd returned, and this time, even earlier. Talia pulled into the parking lot at 5:45 a.m. and found a line already forming along the sidewalk. She blinked through her windshield in disbelief. Pickup trucks, compact cars, 2 bicycles, a family of 4 sipping from a thermos while they waited in lawn chairs. Some held phones, scrolling, refreshing social media, as if waiting for another word from Keanu. Inside, the kitchen lights were already on. Danny was prepping hash browns with both hands, mumbling something about needing 4 more griddles. Marla was at the counter with her jaw set, stacking plates with unnecessary force. Talia entered quietly, tied her apron, and glanced at the clipboard taped to the refrigerator. Another news crew had called. 2 influencers tagged Ruby Pines in their stories. Someone named Jenna West, a lifestyle blogger from Portland with 1 million followers, had posted a photo of the outside of the diner and captioned it, "This is where kindness echoes louder than words. Number Keanu was here." Talia said nothing. She grabbed the coffee pot and began the day. By 6:15, all seats were taken again. The place buzzed with voices and phones, and the scent of pancakes floating through the air like music. Customers whispered their theories in hushed tones. Some thought Keanu was orchestrating a subtle campaign to promote small businesses. Others believed it was an act of forgiveness. A few even wondered if it was all a stunt for a new movie. But the ones who mattered most, the locals, the single moms, the veterans with baseball caps, the elderly couples who hadn't left their farms in weeks, they just came for breakfast. They didn't care about the mystery. They felt something healing in the air, and they wanted to be near it. By Friday, Ruby Pines was operating like a full production kitchen. Talia's feet hurt by 10 a.m. every day, and she started bringing a second pair of socks in her purse just to keep going. But she never complained. She had started to notice the little things. The way people tipped more generously. The soft conversations between strangers. The one woman who left a handwritten card with her bill, "My husband died this year. I hadn't smiled in months until I walked in here." Talia kept the card in her pocket, but Marla didn't see it that way. To her, every new customer brought pressure. Every camera flash meant scrutiny. She watched the line through the blinds of her office window, arms crossed, teeth clenched. "It's a trap," she muttered one afternoon. "He's mocking us. This is some Hollywood trick. Make us look foolish, then disappear and watch us fall apart." Talia shook her head. "He hasn't posted anything else since that first one, and he never said your name." "That's exactly it," Marla said. "Too quiet. That's how they play it." But Talia wasn't sure anymore. There was something in the silence that didn't feel cruel. It felt intentional. Something she couldn't yet explain. By the 6th day, Talia had memorized dozens of new faces. Locals and travelers alike returned just to sit in the booth where Keanu had been turned away. They took pictures of the entryway. One elderly couple brought flowers and left them on the windowsill. People didn't just come to eat, they came to feel. The air inside Ruby Pines had shifted. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about the energy, gentle, expectant, strangely peaceful. Marla, however, saw none of it. She snapped at Danny for chopping onions too slow. She told Talia to stop being so chatty with customers and stick to the tray. She muttered about liability, insurance, even started drafting a statement she never posted. Every day she tightened her control. And every day, more people walked in, smiling. When the local high school teacher, Mr. Daniels, came in with his entire classroom for breakfast, Marla nearly had a breakdown. "This is a diner, not a field trip center," she barked. Talia offered to split her tips to cover the kids' meals. The teacher politely declined, handing over a thick wad of cash. "Mr. Reeves already covered it," he said with a grin. "Donated to the school this morning." Marla's face went white. "He did what?" "Anonymous, technically," Mr. Daniels said with a wink. "But let's just say we know who makes miracles quietly." Talia watched Marla disappear into the back room. She didn't come out for nearly an hour. Customers whispered but didn't linger on it. Their attention was pulled elsewhere. Keanu's single post was still circulating. Thousands had shared it. Comment threads swelled with stories. One woman wrote about losing her job and reading the post while in her car. She decided to take a road trip to Oregon just to see the place where a man like that chose to respond with kindness. Talia read the comment 3 times. She looked up from her phone to the crowd and realized something. They weren't here for revenge. No one was angry. There were no signs, no protests, no boycotts. Just people, families, veterans, children, travelers, all quietly gathered around the same battered booths, sipping coffee, ordering pie, and sitting in silence between conversations as if trying to listen to something deeper. Marla still didn't get it. She stayed distant, cynical. When a news reporter called for an interview, she declined. When a producer from a daytime talk show left a message offering airtime, she erased it. "It'll all blow over," she said flatly. But Talia wasn't so sure anymore. It didn't feel like a trend. It felt like a tide, and it was moving through the town, whether Marla liked it or not. A kind of hush that wasn't empty. It was full of something real, like a lesson waiting to be heard. That night, Talia stayed late to help clean up. She wiped down table after table, her hands moving on autopilot, but her thoughts elsewhere. She glanced at booth 3, the one closest to the window. That's where Keanu had stood, right before Marla asked him to leave. He never sat down, never even raised his voice. But the air around that booth still felt different. As she stared at it, a soft shuffle came from behind. Lucille stood in the doorway. Talia blinked, startled. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" Lucille leaned against her cane, smiling gently. "I figured I'd walk down and see this miracle everyone keeps whispering about." Talia rushed over, helping her to a chair. Lucille looked around the room still and glowing under warm yellow lights. Then her eyes settled on the booth. "Right there?" she asked. Talia nodded. Lucille let out a breath. Amazing how a moment of grace can echo louder than 1,000 arguments. She reached into her purse and handed Talia a folded slip of paper. Talia opened it. It was a printed version of Keanu's social media post. The words felt heavier in her hand this time. Support local. It was so simple, but maybe that's why it worked. Talia folded the paper again, placed it gently in her apron pocket. "Do you think Marla will ever get it?" she asked softly. Lucille's eyes stayed on the window. "Some people don't hear the music until everyone else starts dancing." Talia chuckled, not because it was funny, but because it was true. The next morning, someone left a hand-carved sign on the diner's front lawn. No one knew who made it. It simply read, "Kindness served here." Tourists began taking pictures next to it. A local bakery brought cookies for the staff. A painter left a portrait of the diner on the counter. None of it was planned. None of it asked for. It just happened. And with every new act of goodness, something inside Talia shifted. This wasn't humiliation. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a quiet ripple of grace that started the moment a man said thank you instead of how dare you. Keanu had never returned to the diner, not once. But somehow, it felt like he was still there, not in person, in spirit. Talia looked out the window again, eyes scanning the lot. It was empty, but her heart felt full. Because deep down, she knew he hadn't walked away. He'd planted something, and now it was blooming. That evening, the diner finally quieted. After 4 nonstop days of lines out the door and phones ringing off the hook, the booths stood empty, wiped clean, waiting for another sunrise. Talia sat on the front steps, her apron balled in her hands, the twilight air cool against her flushed skin. She felt a strange combination of exhaustion and awe, as if something sacred had passed through the town and left it humming. Lucille stepped outside slowly, her movements deliberate. She carried 2 glasses of sweet tea, handed one to Talia, then sat beside her on the wooden steps. For a long time, they didn't speak. "I saw someone post a video of the line this morning," Talia finally said, breaking the silence. "It's got almost 2 million views." Lucille took a sip. 2 million? Talia nodded. "And the post Keanu made? The one about the smell of the food reminding him of home? It's being shared like crazy. Celebrities, news pages, influencers. Everyone's talking about it." Lucille didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Her face went still, like the words had touched something buried deep. "You okay, Grandma?" Talia asked. Lucille looked straight ahead, her voice soft. "What was his full name again?" "Keanu Reeves," Talia answered, confused. "Why?" Lucille's fingers tightened around the glass. "Keanu Reeves," she repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. Then she stood without another word. Talia watched her walk back inside, leaving her tea untouched. Later that night, after the last dish was dried and the lights were off, Talia found Lucille in the den, seated on the floor. A large cardboard box sat open beside her. Its flaps spread like wings. Photo albums were scattered across the rug, some already open, others stacked in uneven towers. Lucille's hands trembled slightly as she turned a page in the oldest album. Talia stepped closer, crouched beside her. "Grandma, what are you doing?" Lucille didn't answer right away. Instead, she tapped the corner of a faded black and white photo with the tip of her finger. "This was Toronto," she murmured. 1975. Scarborough. The image was of a classroom, rows of desks, wide windows, children in thick sweaters. A woman stood at the back of the room, her hair swept in a messy bun. Next to her, a young girl barely older than a teenager, wearing a hand-me-down coat. "That girl," Lucille whispered, "is Patricia." Talia furrowed her brow. "Who's Patricia?" Lucille flipped the page. Another photo. This time, the same girl standing outside a corner bakery, holding a baby in her arms. She was just 15 when she had him, strong-willed, quiet. But she had fire. Lucille turned one more page. Slower now. That baby's name was Keanu. Talia's heart stopped for a moment. "Wait, are you saying?" Lucille nodded. "I taught his mother." Talia leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. You taught Keanu Reeves' mother? Lucille didn't look up. She ran her fingertips across the edge of the photograph as if brushing dust from a memory. She came into my class mid-semester, didn't say much. You could tell she was used to being overlooked. Talia stared at the photo, trying to imagine the woman in it raising someone like Keanu. A global icon, yet so quiet, so kind. Was she okay? Talia asked. Lucille nodded. She was. Strong. She had that kind of strength you don't see until someone's falling apart. And even then, it's quiet strength. No drama, no noise. She reached for a yellowed envelope tucked between two album pages. Inside were handwritten notes, most faded, others nearly illegible. She pulled one out. I used to write to my students sometimes, Lucille said. Words of encouragement. She wrote back once. Said, thank you for not looking at me like I was broken. I never forgot that. Talia took a deep breath. Do you think she raised Keanu like that? With quiet strength? Lucille smiled faintly. That boy was raised right, even when life gave him grief. She turned another page, revealing a candid snapshot of a birthday party in the school gymnasium. Balloons hung crookedly from the rafters, and in the corner, the same girl, Patricia, stood holding a toddler. That's him, Lucille said softly. Keanu. He was maybe 2-3 years old. The only child in the room without both parents there. But he didn't cry. He didn't complain. He just watched. Talia looked at the photo, then at her grandmother. Did you ever see him again? Lucille shook her head. Number. But I followed his story. When he started showing up in movies, I recognized his eyes, still full of that same quiet watching. Like he was always trying to understand the world instead of judge it. Talia exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest. Maybe that's why he didn't say anything when Marla turned him away. Lucille didn't answer right away. She just closed the album gently, set it on her lap, and looked over at Talia. There are two kinds of people in this world, child, she said, her voice calm but firm. Some carry storms inside them, others become the shelter. Talia felt those words settle deep in her heart. She thought of the look on Keanu's face that day, how he hadn't flinched, hadn't scowled, hadn't said a word. She thought of how he walked out silently and left behind only a note of kindness for the whole town. He became the shelter, Talia whispered. Lucille nodded once, eyes misty. And now, she added, he's building one for us. The next morning, Lucille placed the photo album on the kitchen table. She had made tea, the kind with lemon zest and honey, the kind she used to make when Talia was sick as a little girl. The light coming through the window bathed the table in soft gold. I want you to take it, she said gently. If Keanu ever comes back, give it to him. Talia stared at her, stunned. You're serious? Lucille nodded. I think there's something in here he might need. A reminder of where he came from, of who helped raise him. Sometimes even the strongest souls need to know they're not alone in the world. Talia reached for the album with reverence. It felt heavier than it looked, not just with paper and cardboard, but with years, with silence, with stories never told. But how will I even get it to him? She asked. Lucille shrugged slightly, smiling. If he meant what he wrote in that post, he'll come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But kindness like that doesn't just vanish. It circles back. Talia placed the album carefully into a canvas bag, her thoughts tumbling over one another. She had started this week full of routine and resentment. Another double shift, another argument with Marla, another set of dreams she was too tired to chase. And now she was holding the childhood of Keanu Reeves in her hands. As she looked at her grandmother's steady expression, something shifted in her. It wasn't just about fame anymore, or guilt. It was about truth, about legacy, about how a single moment, one act of restraint, one silent gesture could unravel decades of bitterness and replace it with light. Later that afternoon, Talia walked to the diner with the photo album still in her bag. The street outside was still buzzing with foot traffic. Locals stood by the windows trying to catch a glimpse of the now famous table where Keanu had Saturday tourists. Snapped selfies under the small chalkboard that now read, Smells like home. Thank you, Keanu. Marla stood behind the counter, jaw tight as usual, but less sharp. Talia noticed she hadn't raised her voice all day. And for once, she wasn't barking at the staff, just silently pouring coffee, her eyes flicking toward the door each time it opened. Talia placed her bag behind the register. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe, ready. Ready in case the man who walked away without a word decided to return not for confrontation, but maybe for connection. Because some stories didn't begin with shouting. They began with silence, a photo album, and a memory no one ever expected to matter again. The mail started piling up by Thursday. At first, Marla didn't want to look at it. She left the envelopes unopened on the kitchen counter, stacked under takeout containers and receipts she'd meant to throw away. But by the fourth morning, when the weight of the letters became impossible to ignore, she sat at the table in her thin housecoat and began opening them one by one. The first envelope contained a postcard. On the front was a sketch of Keanu Reeves' face, surrounded by handwritten words in black marker that read, "We support kindness, not cruelty." She tossed it aside, her jaw tightening. The next letter was softer. It came from a couple in Ohio who had visited the town a year ago. They wrote about the diner's pancakes, the way the walls smelled like cinnamon, and how heartbroken they were to see the place caught in a storm of judgment. They said they hoped Marla was okay, that people made mistakes, that forgiveness was powerful. Marla froze with the letter halfway folded in her hand. The next one was cruel again, handwritten in angry blue pen. It called her a bigot, a washed-up waitress who didn't deserve a counter to stand behind. It said the only reason people came to her diner now was to see where she failed. Her chest burned, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She moved through the stack with robotic rhythm, reading each note with a numb stare. The messages were a mix, some hateful, others gentle. Some called for her to be fired. Others said they understood. A few simply asked, why? By the time she reached the final envelope, she felt exhausted. It was thinner than the rest, no return address, just her name in clean black ink, Marla Jennings. She opened it slowly, expecting another opinion, another wound. But this one didn't shout, it whispered. Inside was a single piece of ivory stationery. Folded once, she opened it. The handwriting was slanted and neat. There was no signature, no emblem, no logo. Just a few lines in ink. Marla, you didn't know who I was, and you acted in a way that reflected what you believed. That takes honesty. I don't hold it against you. We all carry something. Be kind to yourself. K. Marla stared at the words for a long time. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set the letter down on the table. She blinked once, then again. Her throat tightened. She looked around her kitchen, where the clock ticked too loudly and the coffee in her mug had gone cold. The tears came slowly, stubborn at first. The sobs weren't loud. They were quiet, almost embarrassed, like her heart was trying not to wake the rest of the world. She hunched over the letter, her fingers tracing the signature that wasn't really a signature, just a single K. No flourish, no ego, just presence. How was that possible? She whispered to herself. How could someone who had every reason to be furious, someone mocked, dismissed, humiliated, turn around and write a letter like that? She'd heard stories, of course, everyone had, about Keanu giving up his seat on the subway, about tipping janitors thousands, about the man who once waited hours in the rain outside a wrap party just to thank the crew members by name. But she never thought she'd be on the receiving end of it. She leaned back in the chair, her eyes bloodshot and her breath ragged. Her gaze landed on a notepad resting near the stove. It still had the lunch specials scribbled from earlier in the week, chicken pot pie and soup of the day. She grabbed a pen and started to write. She didn't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the way the letter had made her feel seen, yet gently corrected. Like a teacher telling you you'd made a mistake, but handing you the chalk anyway, urging you to try again. Dear Mr. Reeves, she wrote, then paused. That felt too formal, too stiff. She crossed it out. Dear Keanu. Her hand hovered for a second. I'm not good with words, she scribbled. And I'm not the kind of woman who says sorry easily. But I've been thinking about what you wrote, about honesty. She stopped and stared at the paper. The words looked clumsy. She felt clumsy. She tore the page out, crumpled it, and tossed it toward the trash. It missed. She sat still for a while, watching the way the crumpled ball rocked gently on the linoleum. In the silence, her mind returned to the moment he stood at her counter. The way his eyes had searched hers, not with anger, but with patience, with grace. She hadn't recognized him. That was true. But something deeper gnawed at her now. It wasn't that she didn't know who he was. It was that she hadn't even looked. She had treated him like a problem to remove, not a person to serve. And somehow, he had seen her, and had given her something no one else had the chance to see herself. Marla rose slowly from her chair, knees aching. She walked to the window and looked outside. A family was taking a picture near the diner's old neon sign. She didn't feel pride. Not today. She felt humbled. And that, strangely, gave her peace. Later that night, the diner sat empty. Chairs flipped on tables, lights dimmed, fryers quiet. The usual hum of late orders and coffee refills had faded into silence. Marla stood at the counter, wiping it down more slowly than usual. Not out of routine, but reflection. Every groove in the laminate felt like a line of her own story. Worn, stained, but still there. Her eyes drifted back to the envelope that now rested in the pocket of her apron. She hadn't shown it to anyone, not even Talia. It wasn't meant for the world, just for her. There had been no media circus, no TMZ camera at the mailbox, no Instagram photo of Keanu's letter. He didn't need applause. And that alone made her rethink everything she thought she understood about power, about fame, about dignity. She opened the back door and stepped outside. The night air was sharp, with the scent of pine and fading summer. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and stopped. She looked up at the stars and muttered, "You're something else, Keanu." A few more seconds passed. Then, a voice broke the stillness behind her. "Hey Marla, you okay?" It was Talia, clutching a bag of leftover biscuits wrapped in foil. She had come to drop them off at the shelter down the street. It had become her new evening routine. Marla nodded, but didn't speak right away. Then she said quietly, "He wrote me a letter." Talia froze. "Keanu?" Marla nodded again. "Said he doesn't blame me. Said I was honest. That it meant something to him." Talia's eyes widened. "That's unbelievable." Marla chuckled dryly. "That's what I thought too." Talia came closer, her face softening. "What are you going to do with it?" Marla didn't answer for a moment. She looked back at the sky, her eyes glistening in the moonlight. "Maybe frame it," she whispered. "Not to show off, just to remind me." Talia waited. "Remind you of what?" Marla turned, her voice steadier now. "That sometimes the people we dismiss are the ones carrying the most grace. And maybe I don't have to get it all right to still be redeemed." Talia stepped forward and gave her a long, quiet hug. There was nothing more to say. The door to the diner creaked shut behind them. Inside, the place still smelled like fresh bread and bacon grease, same as always. But something in the air had shifted. Not because the world had judged them, but because grace had come quietly and left behind something stronger than shame, a chance to begin again. The next morning, Marla didn't open the diner at 6 a.m., like usual. The closed until 9 sign hung in the window, a rare sight in a town that ran on habits. Locals tapped on the glass, puzzled. A few tried the handle, found it locked, then gave up and walked across the street to the gas station for stale donuts and lukewarm coffee. Inside, the air was still. No music, no clatter of plates. Just a group of staff gathered near the counter, their aprons still tied, their hands awkwardly folded in front of them. Talia leaned against the booth nearest the door, arms crossed, watching Marla with a kind of quiet curiosity. She had never seen the boss like this, nervous, thoughtful, even open. Marla cleared her throat, holding the now slightly crinkled letter in her hands. "Thank you all for coming in early," she said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "I need to share something with you." The crew exchanged glances. Some thought it might be a closure notice. Others feared a corporate buyout. But no one expected what she said next. "It's a letter," Marla continued, "from Keanu Reeves." A gasp rippled through the group. The young dishwasher, Rico, leaned forward. "Wait, the Keanu Reeves?" Marla gave a tired smile. "Yes, the Keanu Reeves." She unfolded the letter with care, smoothing it against the counter. Her eyes scanned the words once more, even though she had them memorized by now. "I'd like to read it aloud," she said, "because I think we all need to hear it." Everyone grew still. She began, her voice a little shaky at first. "Dear Marla, thank you for running a place that smells like home. Even though I wasn't served, even though we never spoke, I felt something that day. Not bitterness, not anger, something else. Something familiar. It reminded me of the diners I used to sit in with my mother. The same kind of chairs, the same kind of air, the same kind of waitress who'd call me sweetheart, even when we couldn't afford the full meal. Life is full of strange circles. You don't always realize when one is closing, until it does." Marla paused, her throat tightening, but she kept going. "I don't hold anything against you. We all have our reasons, our rules. You were honest, and that means more than you know. I just wanted you to know this. If you ever change your mind, I'd love to come back for that meal. No pressure. Wishing you and your team all the best, Keanu." When she finished, the room was silent. No one moved. It was as if the letter had frozen the morning, leaving them suspended between shame and awe. Talia stepped forward slowly, her voice softer than usual. "He really wrote that?" Marla nodded. "I almost didn't believe it myself." "Do you think he means it?" Rico asked. "Like, really wants to come back?" "I don't know," Marla admitted. "But that line, if you ever change your mind, it stuck with me." The cook, Glenn, scratched his chin. "Well, boss, have you?" Marla blinked. The question hung in the air like steam rising from a pot of water, slow, visible, impossible to ignore. "I don't know yet," she whispered. Talia tilted her head. "Maybe it's not too late." The staff slowly dispersed across the diner, murmuring among themselves. Some went to wipe tables that didn't need wiping. Others just sat in booths, pretending to read menus. But their eyes kept drifting back to Marla. She remained by the counter, staring down at the letter. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something more unsettling: vulnerability. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure what the right move was. Talia didn't walk away like the others. She stayed nearby, her eyes on Marla, not judging, just waiting. After a while, she spoke again. "You know, most people wouldn't have shared that letter, especially not someone like you." Marla looked up, her defenses slow to rise. "What do you mean, someone like me?" "I mean, someone who's used to being in control, running the show, being the one who's never wrong." Marla gave a tired sigh, half a laugh. "That obvious, huh?" Talia nodded. "Only every day." Marla glanced around the quiet diner. "I built this place from scratch, not because I wanted fame, not even for the money. I just wanted something that was mine. Something that would always feel safe, predictable." Then he walked in, Talia added. And everything stopped feeling predictable. Marla finished for her. There was a long pause. Then, softly, Talia said, "What if this place could still be yours, but better?" Marla tilted her head. "Better how?" "Better because it grows," Talia said. "Because you grow. Because maybe Maybe it's not weakness to admit when something inside you shifts. Maybe it's strength. Marla didn't respond right away. She sat down at a booth, the leather seat creaking beneath her. She placed the letter gently on the table, smoothing it out again like it was some ancient scroll. She read that last line again to herself. "If you ever change your mind, I'd love to come back for that meal." She whispered it under her breath, then again, a little louder. It sounded different this time. Less like a request, more like an invitation. A bridge. One she hadn't been willing to cross until now. The bell above the door jingled. Customers were lining up outside, some waving through the glass. Talia peeked out the window and grinned. "Looks like folks are hungry." Marla stood up, a bit taller this time. Her voice carried more weight, not harsh, but sure. "Let's open." Talia started toward the door, but Marla called out again. "And later today," she said, glancing toward the old corkboard near the coffee station, "we're putting that letter up, right where everyone can see it." Talia turned, surprised. "Really?" Marla nodded. "If someone like Keanu Reeves can write something like that, maybe it's time I learn how to listen." Talia smiled, eyes glinting. "I think he'd like that." As the door opened and the scent of fresh coffee spilled into the morning, a quiet hope filled the room. The kind that doesn't shout or demand attention but changes everything anyway. Marla had never been one for second chances. She was the kind of woman who kept her head down and her doors locked tight, literally and figuratively. But something about that letter, about those simple words written in neat, deliberate script, had opened a window she didn't know was stuck shut. So the next morning, she showed up early to the diner with a yellow legal pad in her hand, a fresh pot of coffee brewing, and something else she hadn't carried in a long time, hope. Talia arrived 5 minutes later, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She paused at the doorway, watching Marla scribble something on the pad, chewing the cap of her pen like a schoolgirl. "You planning a war?" Talia asked. Marla didn't look up. "A meal." Talia blinked. "Wait, are you serious?" Marla set the pen down and finally met her eyes. "He said he'd come back if I changed my mind. Well, I have. I'm not doing it for the press. I'm not doing it to prove anything. I just want to make it right." Talia smiled. "That's the best reason." Marla pushed the pad toward her. "I want it quiet. Just him. No flash, no crowd. Just dinner." Talia scanned the scribbles. Notes about entrees, side dishes, wine pairings. Even a hand-drawn table layout for booth 3, the one Keanu had originally tried to sit at. Her eyes stopped on a line at the bottom. "Supper and an apology," Talia read aloud. "You're writing that?" Marla nodded. "In a note, handwritten, like he did for me." Talia sat across from her, her expression softening. "I can reach out to his assistant. I still have the contact info from when they returned the signed menu." "You kept that?" "Of course I did," Talia said, almost laughing. "You think something like that just disappears?" Marla nodded slowly. "Good, let's do it." They spent the morning planning. Not just the menu, though, that took up 2 full pages, but every detail. Marla insisted on using real silverware, not the cheap diner forks that bent with pressure. She ordered white linen napkins and dusted off the good china from her house. She even pulled the old record player from the attic and tested it, smiling when the soft crackle of jazz filled the kitchen. By noon, she was back at the booth, pen in hand, staring at the blank note card Talia had brought from her own stationery drawer. She took a breath and began to write. "Dear Keanu, I don't know if you'll accept this, but I hope you'll read it. I want to invite you to dinner not as a celebrity, not as a statement, just as a man who deserved kindness and didn't get it. I was wrong. Truly. I've thought about that day more than I care to admit. If you ever feel like it, I'd like to serve you the meal I should have served the first time. No press, no cameras, just supper and an apology. Marla." She read it over once, twice, then folded it into an envelope. Her hands didn't shake this time. By the next morning, Talia had already emailed Keanu's team. She hadn't expected a quick response. But to her surprise, a reply came within hours, short, respectful, and sincere. "Thank you for your message. Mr. Reeves appreciates the kind gesture. He will review the invitation personally. No press will be notified." Marla was stunned. She read the reply 3 times, as if trying to spot a trick hidden in the wording. But there was none. It was as genuine as the letter she'd written. Talia watched her closely, seeing something soften in the corners of her boss's tired eyes. "You think he'll come?" Marla asked, folding and unfolding the reply. "I do," Talia said, then added, "He seems like the kind of man who doesn't hold grudges, and he's curious. Kind people usually are." They continued planning, like 2 women possessed. Marla selected the ingredients herself, not trusting anyone else to get them right. She visited the butcher, the farmer's market, even drove an hour out of town to a bakery that made fresh sourdough without shortcuts. She picked out wine from a local vineyard that Lucille once recommended and called the old woman that same night just to ask if she remembered the good Pinot from '98. "I do," Lucille said over the phone. "And if he's coming back, child, you best set the table with respect." The private dinner was scheduled for a Tuesday evening. The diner would close early. No staff except Marla, Talia, and one kitchen hand who had sworn silence with both loyalty and a tearful handshake. Talia dimmed the overhead lights just enough to let the soft flicker from 2 pillar candles on booth 3 carry the warmth. That morning, the final confirmation came. A simple email from the same assistant. "Mr. Reeves will arrive at 7:15 p.m. alone. No camera, no entourage. He accepts the invitation with gratitude." Marla stood frozen in the kitchen, the printout shaking slightly in her hand. "He's coming." Talia looked up from setting silverware. "Tonight?" "Tonight," Marla whispered. There was no cheering, no giddy squeals, just silence, followed by a quiet breath of awe. Marla changed twice before deciding on her grandmother's old navy dress. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt honest. She wore her hair down, something she hadn't done in over a decade. No makeup, just clean skin and a simple necklace with a faded charm that had once belonged to her mother. At 6:50 p.m., she wiped down booth 3 one last time. Every surface gleamed. A single flower rested in a mason jar on the table, white, with soft pink tips, the same kind Marla had planted in front of the diner 20 years ago. Talia stood by the counter, watching the clock. They didn't say much. There was nothing left to plan, just to wait. At 7:14 p.m., a familiar motorcycle sound rumbled in the distance. No roaring entrance, no flashing headlights, just a soft hum that grew steadily until it stopped right outside the door. Marla held her breath. The door opened. Keanu stepped through the door just as the clock struck 7:15. The bell above the entrance gave a soft chime, nothing more than a whisper. He wore a simple black jacket, jeans, and boots, dusted with the faintest hint of road salt. In his hand, he carried a small brown box from Harper's Bakery down the road, the same one Marla used to visit every Sunday before her father died. His other hand extended gently, without pretense. "Good evening," Keanu said, his voice calm, warm. Marla wiped her palms on her apron and stepped forward, heart thudding in her chest. "Mr. Reeves." "Keanu, please," he interrupted with a soft smile. "And I believe this belongs on the table." He handed her the box. Inside were 2 still warm loaves of olive sourdough, wrapped in parchment and tied with baker's twine. Marla's throat caught. This wasn't just a gesture. It was memory, effort, and respect, wrapped in flour and time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. Talia appeared from the side with 2 glasses of water and gestured toward the booth by the window, the one Marla had chosen days ago, the one where the afternoon light always lingered longer than anywhere else in the diner, the place where people came to confess, to cry, to heal. Tonight, it would be the place where a wrong was faced head-on. Keanu moved with quiet confidence, not actor confidence, not celebrity presence, just stillness. He slid into the booth with ease, his gaze scanning the room not for flaws, but for feeling. He took it in slowly, the checkered floor, the faded photos on the wall, the handwritten specials board still untouched from lunchtime. "It smells like home," he said softly. Marla sat across from him, hands clasped nervously. Talia stood off to the side, giving them space, until Marla turned and gave her a small nod. "Talia, would you mind bringing Lucille in?" Keanu raised an eyebrow.
"Lucille? She wanted to meet you,"
Talia said, already heading to the back room. "And I think you might remember her." Moments later, the door creaked open again, and Lucille Alvarez entered the room, walking carefully with her cane, but holding herself with grace. Her silver hair was braided, her coat buttoned up high despite the warm room. When she saw Keanu, she stopped. He stood immediately, his expression shifting from calm to something stunned and deeply personal.
"Lucille?"
he asked, his voice softer now, touched by something old and nearly forgotten. Lucille smiled. "I knew you wouldn't forget." Marla looked back and forth between them, confused but moved. Keanu took a step closer, then two. "You used to read to me, in Toronto. When my mom was working at night, you watched me sometimes." Lucille chuckled. "You were small, quiet, always carried around that little red notebook and a pencil stub." His eyes brimmed with emotion, and he nodded. "I remember. You smelled like rosemary and always made lentil soup." Marla stood frozen, tears suddenly stinging her own eyes. This wasn't just dinner anymore. This was history folding in on itself, connecting lives across decades and wounds. Lucille moved closer, eyes glistening as she touched Keanu's arm. "Your mother was trying her best, working 2 jobs. She was always so proud of you, said you had an old soul." Keanu took a slow breath. "She passed a few years ago, but I still remember her humming at night and the way she'd tuck in her apron before opening a can of soup." Lucille nodded, her eyes not leaving his. "She once asked me if I thought you'd grow up kind. I told her that boy already island silence hung in the air, soft and sacred. No cameras, no audience. Just 3 souls with wounds and wisdom between them." Marla, still standing by the booth, cleared her throat gently. "Would you like to sit, Lucille? We saved a seat for you." Lucille smiled and lowered herself beside Keanu with a bit of effort. Talia brought over a small stool to rest her feet and placed a linen napkin on her lap, like it was a 5-star restaurant. Marla returned with the bread, already sliced, warm and fragrant. A small plate of rosemary butter rested beside it. "Thought we'd start simple." Keanu broke a slice in half and handed it to Lucille first. Then he took his, but didn't eat yet. "Thank you," he said to both women, "for this." Marla's fingers shook slightly as she set down a steaming bowl of tomato basil soup in front of him. The same one she had denied him just days ago. But tonight, it had been made with care, the way her father used to when money was tight and hearts were heavy. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, looking at him. "For that day, for the way I judged you. I don't know what came over me." Keanu shook his head. "We all carry something. You didn't see me, but you weren't supposed to." Talia leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes filled with something close to awe. "You showed us something. Without raising your voice, without saying a word." He finally took a bite of the bread, then sipped the soup. This is better than I remembered." Lucille smiled proudly. "That's because it's made with regret and redemption. Best seasoning there, Island." They laughed softly. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Marla watched the way Keanu interacted. No ego, no performance, just presence. The same presence that had sat quietly at the counter when no one would serve him. The same one that had walked out without anger, without slamming a door. She suddenly felt the weight of all the assumptions she had made, not just about him, but about anyone who didn't fit the neat labels she had built to survive. "Do you really forgive me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Keanu looked straight at her, I forgave you the moment I walked out the door. Lucille reached out, placing her hand on Marla's.
Then maybe it's time you forgive yourself.
A hush fell again, but this time it wasn't shame. It was peace beginning to bloom.
The dinner table settled into a rhythm that surprised even Marla. After the soup came a dish of lemon-roasted chicken with honey-glazed carrots and rosemary potatoes, her husband's favorite. She had made it so many times she could do it in her sleep, but tonight she had been wide awake for every step. Talia had helped her season the chicken and triple-check the herbs. Even the gravy had been stirred slowly, with more care than usual. Keanu took his time, eating with quiet appreciation. He didn't praise the food out loud, but his eyes did, especially when he looked up between bites with that familiar, thoughtful gaze. Lucille hummed approvingly as she enjoyed each spoonful, and Talia brought more water and wiped the table gently without interrupting the mood. Conversation started slow. It wasn't forced. It was like a creek, gently winding its way between old stones. Keanu asked Lucille about her years working in early childhood education, and she told him about reading Dr. Seuss books to restless 5-year-olds with goldfish crackers in their pockets. You always liked green eggs and ham, she said to Keanu with a warm chuckle.
I still do, he smiled.
Sam I Am was persistent. That made Lucille laugh, and even Marla cracked a small smile as she listened. The moment softened her nerves. She reached for the bowl of salad and offered some to Keanu. He nodded politely, and as she served it, her sleeve brushed the edge of the table. Then, out of nowhere, Keanu asked, "Did your husband cook too?" Marla's hand froze for just a moment. Then she slowly set the bowl down and nodded. He did, Sunday mornings especially. He'd hum old gospel hymns while scrambling eggs. Said it was his way of easing into the Lord's day. Keanu looked at her, eyes kind but patient. He was a pastor, wasn't he? Her throat tightened. Yes, for 22 years. First Baptist. He passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It took him so fast we didn't get time to say goodbye properly. I'm sorry, Keanu said gently. Lucille placed her hand on Marla's arm. We all miss him. He was a good man. Marla nodded slowly. He used to volunteer at the rehab shelter your foundation funded. Said there was a man who'd been through hell and back and found hope there. A former actor. He didn't tell me who. But now I wonder. Keanu's gaze lowered. He wiped his mouth and rested his hands on the table. There've been many like that. I didn't do much. Just help fund what they were already doing. Marla looked at him, voice quieter now. But that helped change lives. I didn't know. I just didn't know. You weren't supposed to, Keanu said. It's not about being known. It's about giving pain a place to go. I choose to plant it in kindness. His words sat in the air like scripture. Talia blinked, her arms folded loosely. That's beautiful. Marla nodded, her throat catching again. I've been trying to carry it all myself. The grief, the guilt, the shame. I forgot what it felt like to set something down. Keanu listened without interruption. He didn't nod to signal agreement or jump in with encouragement. He simply allowed her space, something so few people offered in a world that rushed to respond. Marla leaned back slightly in her chair, drawing in a slow breath. You know, after my husband passed, I couldn't even bring myself to walk into his office. It stayed the same for 2 years. Sermon notes still on the desk. Bible still open to Psalms. Coffee mug half full. He had this little wooden sign on the bookshelf that said, "Grace waits even when we don't." I didn't understand that until now. Keanu's eyes never left hers. It sounds like he lived what he preached. Marla smiled faintly, then her voice trembled. He would have loved tonight. He believed in second chances, in humility, and he believed in you. Said that, kind men don't need cameras. Keanu didn't respond right away. He glanced down at his napkin, folded it slowly, then looked back up. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for letting me back in. Lucille dabbed her eyes gently. This is what the world forgets, human moments like this. Quiet dinners, shared pain, unspoken understanding. Not everything needs to be forgiven on a stage. Talia nodded. We've seen too much shouting and too little listening. That's what tonight reminds me of. The plates were cleared gently, and Marla returned from the kitchen with a homemade apple pie. Still warm, the crust golden and cracked just slightly from the heat. She set it on the table and smiled, her voice soft. I didn't know what you liked, so I made what I would have served anyone else. Keanu smiled. Apple pie was always my mom's favorite. She sliced it with steady hands, placing each portion onto cream-colored plates. The vanilla ice cream had started to melt slightly by the time it reached Keanu's place. He took a bite, then paused, closed his eyes briefly, and said, "That's incredible." Marla blushed. "Thank you." But the warmth of the dessert didn't entirely shield them from the growing silence that followed. The table grew still. Forks clinked more softly now. Words felt harder to find. There was a weight between them, something that hadn't yet been said. Not resentment, not discomfort, but something older, more fragile. The kind of silence that only emerges when everything that truly mattered had already been spoken, and what remained were echoes of deeper feelings too hard to name. Marla set down her fork. There's no way to undo what happened, Keanu. No way to erase that day. But I want you to know, I was wrong, and I've paid for it. Not with money, with sleepless nights and a heart that knows better now. Keanu didn't flinch. He looked at her with calm eyes. Pain teaches, and sometimes the lesson lives in what's left behind. Talia watched them quietly, hands folded in her lap. Marla whispered, "So what do we do now?" Keanu placed his hands on the table, took a long breath, and then offered the smallest, gentlest answer. We finished dessert. It was a Thursday morning when the envelope arrived. No return address. Just the name of the diner, written in black ink on the front. Talia found it tucked under the front door mat as she came in early to prep the coffee machine. She almost didn't notice it, nearly stepping over it as she pushed the door open with her shoulder. She handed it to Marla without a word, still groggy from the morning chill. Marla looked at the plain envelope for a long moment before carefully tearing it open. Inside was a single-page letter. No signature, no company logo. Just clean, centered type. This is not a handout. It is a thank you for every second chance offered, for every meal served with grace, for every person treated like a person when they had nothing left. Use this to keep doing what matters. No press, no plaque, no name. Below the letter was a cashier's check. The number made Marla gasp enough to replace the cracked stovetop, upgrade the refrigeration units, renovate the bathrooms with full accessibility, and still have funds left to sponsor meals for families in need. She sank into the nearest booth without saying a word. Talia came around, peered over her shoulder, and froze. Is this real? Marla nodded slowly. Her hands trembled as she held the paper. Who would do this? Talia whispered. Marla didn't answer, but she knew. She had known since the last slice of pie was served, and Keanu's quiet goodbye had lingered in the room long after he left. He hadn't made a speech. He hadn't promised anything. But there had been a look in his eyes, one that said he didn't leave things unfinished. Later that day, she called Lucille into the office and showed her the letter. Lucille read it twice, then carefully folded it back into the envelope and slid it across the desk. Whatever it bought, Lucille said gently, make sure it keeps feeding more than just bellies. And that's exactly what Marla intended to do. She called a contractor that same afternoon, asking for an estimate on remodeling the back kitchen and adding a small wheelchair ramp at the front door. She didn't tell them about the check. She just said she was ready to invest in the future. The next morning, she was at the diner an hour earlier than usual. She scrubbed the booths herself, humming under her breath. She double-checked the freezer temperature, reorganized the spice rack, even patched a tear in one of the bar stools with duct tape and fabric glue. When Talia arrived, she found Marla already rolling dough for biscuits.
"You okay?" Talia asked. Marla nodded, not looking up. Better than okay. There was no press release, no ribbon cutting, no public announcement. The money didn't come with a spotlight, and Marla didn't ask for one. Within days, the changes began. The old coffee machine that sputtered every other morning was quietly replaced by a new industrial-grade brewer. The regulars noticed the richer smell, the quicker refills, the absence of that usual mechanical cough, but nobody asked questions. Marla just smiled and said, she finally retired. The booth by the window, once taped at the corner and sloped to the left, had been reupholstered in soft red vinyl. The paint on the windowsills was touched up. A soft, angled ramp appeared at the front step, blending into the brickwork so seamlessly that most guests assumed it had always been there. Lucille was the first to test it. On a rainy Tuesday morning, she came in with her walker, paused at the base of the ramp, and blinked at it like she was seeing something from a dream. Talia came out from the kitchen holding a mop. "Go ahead," she said gently. Lucille took one step, then another, and then she smiled. Marla watched from behind the counter, her eyes glistening. That afternoon, she added a new item to the chalkboard menu. Community plate, pay what you can, served with dignity, no fanfare, just chalk. That evening, a young father with tired eyes and two fidgety kids walked in. He glanced up at the board, hesitated, then pointed toward it and asked softly, "Is that real?" Marla nodded. He handed over 2 crumpled dollar bills and said, "They haven't had a hot meal in 2 days." Marla didn't say a word. She simply reached for 2 plates and started serving. Later, after the family had eaten and left quietly, Talia found Marla in the back, wiping down trays that were already clean. "You could have told the press," Talia said. "People would love to hear this." Marla shook her head. "He wouldn't want that." "Keanu?" Talia whispered. Marla didn't reply, but the look on her face was answer enough. Talia smiled. "Then we won't say a word, we'll just cook." And that's what they did. Word spread through the community in quiet ways, a whisper here, a recommendation there. People began showing up with more than hunger, they brought hope, and in return, they were given more than food. Veterans who felt invisible found a place to sit without judgment. Single moms juggling kids and bills found warm meals and kind eyes. Elderly folks with no family found chairs waiting for them, and names remembered. All of it, every small detail, was made possible by that anonymous investment. And though no one ever confirmed it, everyone who worked there knew it was Keanu. Not because he needed recognition, but because he knew what it meant to be unseen, and what it felt like when someone finally saw you. Marla never framed the check. She never even showed it to most of the staff. But every morning, as she flipped on the lights and rolled out dough, she would glance at the envelope tucked in the back of her recipe book, the one with no name, just a quiet letter. And then she'd whisper to herself, "Let's feed the world, one soul at a time." The first visitors trickled in one weekend morning, quietly and without fuss. A couple from Oregon drove 8 hours after reading a Reddit post that mentioned a humble little diner with the best apple pie in the state and a story behind it that involved Keanu Reeves. They ordered breakfast, tipped well, and sat for nearly 2 hours just watching the room. Next came a young woman from Michigan with a camera slung over her shoulder. She didn't ask for autographs or photos. She simply asked, "Is this where it happened?" Talia looked up from the coffee machine and smiled. "Yes, but it's not about what happened. It's about what's still happening." The woman nodded and left a generous donation in the jar marked Community Plate Fund. Within weeks, the place was never empty. Bloggers, fans, curious travelers, and people who simply needed a place to feel human again started coming through the door. No big sign was needed. The story had grown on its own, spreading like soft wind through quiet hearts. Lucille, who once sat quietly in the corner booth with a crossword puzzle, now ran a tutoring circle in the newly converted back room. The renovation had been simple: a fresh coat of paint, a bookshelf from a local church, and a long-donated table, but it became the heartbeat of the diner. Every Wednesday and Saturday afternoon, the back room was filled with kids. Some came in uniform, Some came barefoot. Some came without having eaten breakfast. But they all came. Lucille greeted each child by name and gave them a pencil and a smile. "We're not here to be perfect," she told them. "We're here to get better." One boy, maybe 8, once asked her, "Why do you do this for free?" She paused, then answered, "Because someone once read to me when I couldn't read. That changed my life. Now it's my turn." And it became her mission. Across the front of the room hung a small sign written in marker, "No one falls alone." Meanwhile, Marla expanded her vision of what a diner could be. She began reaching out to local halfway houses, inviting recovering addicts and formerly incarcerated individuals to train under her as cooks, baristas, or servers. She didn't post flyers or write a press release. She just showed up one day at a halfway home with a pot of stew and said, "I could use help if anyone wants a shot." 3 men and 1 woman showed up the next morning. Marla handed them aprons and taught them how to mop first, not as punishment, but as grounding. "Everyone starts at the floor," she said, "because that's where we learn to stand again." And they did. Within a month, one of the trainees, a tall man named Deshaun, became the lead prep cook. He chopped onions faster than anyone and made a chili that could bring tears to your eyes. And when asked about his journey, he simply said, "Marla saw me. That was enough." One quiet morning, Marla found herself standing at the front window just before opening time. Outside, the sun was still low, casting a golden filter over the parking lot. A family of 4 was waiting, 2 kids bouncing with excitement. She unlocked the door, and before they stepped inside, the mother whispered, "He told us to come." Marla blinked. "Who?" The woman smiled. "Your quiet friend with the bread." Keanu hadn't returned since that dinner. Not in person, not with fanfare. But the impact of his visit remained, deep and lasting. Somehow, without cameras or interviews, the story of what he did traveled further than any viral headline could have. People didn't just come for pancakes. They came for hope. Inside the kitchen, Deshaun was flipping cornbread on the flat top, humming an old gospel tune. Maria, the young woman from the halfway home, prepped a tray of fresh greens and adjusted the napkin holders with more care than most people reserved for museum exhibits. Everything had become intentional, even the small details, handwritten notes on to-go bags that said things like, "You are seen," or "Come back soon, friend," were now standard practice. No one instructed it, it just happened. Kindness had become part of the operating rhythm. In the back, Lucille organized story time after tutoring, using old children's books donated by visitors. She kept one in particular tucked in a drawer, an original copy of The Little Engine That Could. When a child read it without stumbling, she'd let them sign their name inside the back cover. The pages were now filled with signatures in shaky pencil, crooked crayon, and the occasional brave Sharpie. One Saturday afternoon, an elderly man in a veteran's cap shuffled through the door using a cane. He looked around the room, confusion flickering behind his eyes. Marla approached gently. "You okay, sir?" The man reached into his coat and pulled out a folded clipping. It was a grainy photo of the diner's sign, next to a handwritten note that said, "Come here, you'll find peace. K.R." Tears welled in Marla's eyes. She nodded. "You came to the right place." She gave him a booth by the window. Lucille brought him coffee, and Deshaun sent out a free bowl of chili. By evening, the man was laughing with a group of teenagers who had gathered around to hear his war stories. Before he left, he told Marla, "I hadn't spoken to anyone in 4 days. I almost didn't make it through the week." "Thank you for this," Marla only replied. "Come back tomorrow. Same seat's yours." The next day, he did. That's how it was now. People came, not because they needed food, but because they needed healing. The walls were still the same color, the chairs still wobbled slightly, the menu still had typos. But something sacred lived inside those imperfections now. The diner had become a kind of sanctuary, where the sacred met the simple, and where second chances were served with every cup of coffee. The sky over the town was gray that morning, not stormy, just quiet. A steady breeze moved through the narrow streets,
and the faded awning over the diner's front door rippled softly, as if stretching after a long night's sleep. Inside, Marla was stacking clean coffee mugs on the shelf behind the counter when she heard the familiar chime. She didn't look up right away. It was early, not quite opening hours, and the door had been sticking lately. Probably Lucille returning early from her morning walk, or maybe Deshawn had forgotten his keys again. But then she heard the voice. "Good morning, Marla." Her hands froze. She turned slowly, heart catching in her chest, and there he was. Keanu stood just inside the doorway, holding nothing but a folded newspaper and a familiar quietness that made even the old walls of the diner pause. He looked a little thinner than last time, his hair tucked back in a low knot, beard slightly longer, but his eyes were warm, gentle. "I was nearby," he said simply. "Thought I'd stop in. Didn't mean to startle you." Marla wiped her hands on her apron and smiled. "You didn't. You just surprised me. It's good to see you again." He stepped forward, gave her a soft nod, and glanced around. The diner had changed. The walls now held framed drawings from children who came to Lucille's tutoring program. Some were lopsided pictures of pancakes and bacon. Others showed rainbows and stick figures holding hands. At the back, the new expanded room glowed with soft string lights, donated from a wedding that never happened. Tables were full of mismatched chairs. The smell of fresh bread and cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. Keanu took it all in without a word. He picked the corner booth again, the same one from the night he brought the bread. Marla followed him with a steaming cup of black coffee and placed it down gently. "We still serve it the same," she said. "Hot and honest." Keanu chuckled. "That's the best kind." Lucille peeked from the back room, recognized him instantly, and made her way over. Her posture had improved, her steps more confident now. She wore a purple scarf today, the one a little girl had gifted her after reading her first full sentence. "You came back," Lucille said, a bit breathless. "I did," Keanu said warmly. "And I hear you're teaching now," Lucille beamed. "I'm trying. They're smart kids. Just needed a quiet place." He nodded. "Sometimes that's all any of us need." They talked for a while. About books, about the diner's growing community, and how the vet who came for chili now volunteers on Saturdays to help paint over graffiti in the alley behind the diner. Lucille told him about Talia's dream of becoming a teacher, how she had started taking night classes online, and how she stayed up until 2 a.m. grading pretend homework just to prepare. Keanu listened intently. Every word mattered to him. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small envelope, and placed it on the edge of the table. "Would you mind giving this to her?" he asked. Lucille nodded, curious but respectful. He didn't stay long, just finished his coffee, stood up, and gave both women a hug that lingered a second longer than expected. Before leaving, he looked back once. "This place," he said, glancing around. "It matters." Later that afternoon, when the lunch rush had faded into the soft clatter of dishes and the hum of the dishwasher, Talia walked in from the side entrance, her backpack sliding off one shoulder. Her hair was a little frizzy from the wind, and she looked tired but determined, the kind of tired that meant she had given her all to something she cared about. Lucille met her at the counter, holding the small envelope Keanu had left behind. She didn't say anything, just handed it over with a knowing look and a small smile. Talia furrowed her brow. "What's this?" "Someone stopped by today," Lucille said gently. "Left it for you." Talia opened it slowly. Inside was a simple card, plain white, no logos, no decorations, just handwriting. In careful black ink, it read, "People like you change the world. Keep going. K." She read it again and again. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't cry, not then. Instead, she sat on the nearest stool and stared at the card like it was the first real proof that all her late nights, her quiet sacrifices, her effort to rebuild her life with purpose, it was seen. And not just seen, but believed in. That evening, she placed the card inside the plastic sleeve of her notebook. It stayed there through her exams, her practicum, and the day she got accepted into a university teaching program with full financial aid. She never told anyone where the letter came from,
She didn't need to. A few months later, the back wall of the diner got a mural. No one commissioned it. It just appeared one morning, painted by a former gang member who had turned to art after working in the kitchen. The mural showed an open hand holding seeds. Above it, the words read, "Kindness grows where it's planted." Visitors from out of town started trickling in. Some were fans, some were just curious. They took pictures, asked for coffee, and always left a few dollars more than they owed. One woman drove all the way from Oregon just to say thank you. Her son had been saved by a community meal like the ones the diner now offered every Thursday. Word spread that something unusual was happening in this small-town diner. Not celebrity magic, not viral content. Something quieter. A mother who once struggled to walk without pain now led tutoring sessions with a bright scarf and an even brighter voice. A young woman who had once been mocked for asking a stranger for an autograph now stood behind the counter, respected by everyone who walked through the door. And a man who could have told the world what he had done chose silence instead. Keanu never gave interviews about the diner. He never let his name be used on press releases or social media posts. He came back once more, months later, slipped in through the back door, washed dishes during a busy night, and left without a word. Only Marla noticed. She found his coat neatly folded by the sink, a small thank you note left in its pocket. "This place reminds me of my mother's kitchen. Thank you for letting me belong here." She didn't frame it. She tucked it into the old recipe box under the counter, right next to the original pancake mix formula her late husband used to tweak on Sundays. Because that note didn't need a spotlight. It belonged with the quiet things, the things that built something real, like trust, like redemption, like family. Talia stood quietly by the bulletin board that had taken over the far wall of the diner. What used to be a faded corkboard holding a couple of local ads and lost dog flyers had transformed into something else entirely, something sacred. A place where people pinned their pain, their gratitude, their second chances. Each note was handwritten, no typed pages, no hashtags, just real ink, real stories, real people. There was the letter from a single dad who had brought his twin boys in on a rainy day with only $7 in his wallet. He wrote about how Marla had waved the bill away and served them warm soup with apple slices shaped like stars. That was the first time in years he'd seen his son smile without a screen in front of them. Next to it, a note from a teenage girl with a shaky hand and careful lettering. She'd come in after a fight with her mother, sat in the corner crying, and Lucille had slid her a plate of fries and a napkin without a word. The napkin had a simple message: "You matter more than you know." She came back the next day and volunteered to help clean tables. Then there was the story from an old man with a cane who used to walk past the diner every day and never come in. One winter morning, Marla noticed him sitting on the bench outside, shivering. She opened the door and handed him a cup of cocoa without asking his name. He wrote that it was the first human kindness he'd received since his wife died. All of it was there. A living wall of what the diner had become. Not just a place to eat, a place to exhale. A place where shame wasn't served and no one was rushed out the door. Talia held Keanu's note in her hand. The one he'd written months ago and left quietly, folded in a plain envelope without return address or signature beyond a simple K. She had carried it with her through so much final exams, job interviews, moments of self-doubt, even her graduation ceremony. It had been tucked in her wallet the day she signed the lease on her first apartment. It had been in her pocket when she stood up in front of a crowd and told her story for the first time. Now, she felt it was time. She slipped the note into a new frame. Nothing fancy, just a plain black border and clean glass. Then, gently, she pinned it to the center of the wall. Not above the others, not below. Just in the middle, right where it could be, surrounded by the voices of those who had also found their way through the dark. Lucille passed by and paused when she saw it. "He never made a scene about anything," she said softly. "No," Talia replied. "He just made space for everyone else." They both stood there for a moment, looking at the note. Then Lucille reached out and gently straightened the frame, making sure it was level. Talia stepped back and looked at the whole wall, the way the notes curled slightly at the corners. The ink faded in some, bold in others.
paper hearts mixed with scrawled thank yous, and quiet confessions. It wasn't polished or curated. It was real. And that's what made it beautiful. The next morning, the diner opened early as usual. Marla was already prepping biscuits in the back. Lucille wiped down the counter with slow, circular motions.
Talia brewed the first pot of coffee, her fingers still tingling from what she had done the night before. She didn't tell anyone else about the letter. She didn't need to. Somehow, people noticed it anyway. The day moved along like most others, but something in the air had shifted. Even the regulars sensed it. There was Mr. Calvin, who always ordered the same thing: scrambled eggs, well-done bacon, and rye toast with no butter. That morning, after finishing his plate, he stood up, walked over to the wall, and read a few notes. He paused at Keanu's, nodded once to himself, and then returned to his seat with eyes a little shinier than before. A mother with 2 young kids sat near the back. Her youngest spilled orange juice, and instead of panicking, she smiled, grabbed napkins, and whispered, "It's just a mess, not the end of the world." Talia caught that moment and smiled too. Something about the space had become more forgiving. Later in the afternoon, 2 high schoolers who usually laughed too loud came in. This time, they sat quietly for 10 minutes, reading the wall. One of them pulled out a pen and scrawled something on a scrap of notebook paper. Talia saw her fold it, pin it carefully, and then glance around like she was doing something sacred. By closing time, 5 new notes had appeared. None of them asked for attention. None of them were selfies or grand gestures. Just quiet reflections, gratitude, healing, forgiveness. A simple chain reaction of what Keanu had started by not defending himself, but by showing what stillness and kindness looked like under pressure. Talia locked up that night and lingered near the counter. She thought about what she might say if someone asked her what the biggest lesson had been. She imagined herself standing in front of a crowd, maybe at a school or a community event, and she'd say something like this: "Keanu never fought back with anger. He never shouted or tried to go viral. When someone tried to humiliate him, he let his actions speak. He didn't push people aside to prove his worth. He just proved that grace isn't weakness. It's strength in its most disarming form." She'd probably mention the letter too, how it wasn't flashy or long, just a few lines, words that settled deep into her bones when she read them. She whispered them now, looking at the note on the wall. "People like you change the world. Keep going." That was it. No signature, no demand for recognition, just belief. Pure, quiet belief in someone else's light. Talia turned off the lights and stepped outside, locking the door behind her. The night was cool. A faint breeze passed through the narrow street. She glanced back through the glass door one last time. Inside, the wall of stories glowed faintly from the emergency exit light. It looked like a constellation. Each paper a star, each message a spark. And right in the center, framed and silent, was the letter that reminded her who she was becoming. She didn't need applause. She just needed to keep going. Talia stood at the window of the diner one evening, her hand gently polishing the glass, though it was already clean. Outside, the streetlight flickered. Inside, the lights were warm, casting a golden hue across the room. The letter from Keanu still sat on the story wall, pinned just above the spot where Marla used to hang up photos of guests who'd made them laugh. She didn't touch it. She just stared at it for a moment, then turned back toward the tables. Each one had a story. Now, a memory, a moment of grace. "He didn't change the world with power," Talia said softly as Lucille walked over beside her. "He changed it with patience." Lucille nodded, her hands resting on the top of her cane. "The most shocking thing wasn't what he said," she added. "It's what he chose not to do." They stood there in silence, letting those words fill the room like a benediction. What he chose not to do. No lawsuits, no press releases, no viral takedowns, no "don't you know who I am" moment. Instead, he had chosen to show up quietly, break bread, listen to the people who had once mocked him, and then walk away without asking for anything in return. The power of restraint had become the loudest echo in that small diner. That letter he left, "People like you change the world. Keep going," had been folded and unfolded so many times it was soft at the creases. But its message remained sharp, steady. Now it sat among hundreds of others. Talia had started the wall after that night. She found a basket in the back, left some blank note cards on each table, and simply wrote on the top, "Tell us your story." No one told her to. She just did it. Within a week, the wall was full. Letters from veterans who'd wandered in and found warmth. Notes from single parents who couldn't afford a meal but had been fed anyway. Words from teenagers who found confidence after Lucille helped them with schoolwork. And some, Talia kept those in a separate drawer, were from people who had once been homeless, jobless, or addicted, and had come through that diner like a wind through a cracked window. They wrote about how one quiet meal had changed the direction of their day, or how Marla had looked them in the eye and said, "You matter," with the kind of conviction usually reserved for pastors. One woman had written, "I was going to end my life that night. I walked in here just to feel warm one more time. Someone offered me coffee. No judgment, no stares, just kindness. I'm still here because of it." Talia didn't post that one anywhere. She just cried. And then, quietly, she pinned up Keanu's note beneath it. Because somehow, that man who had walked into the diner alone, humble, silent, and full of apology, had taught them something none of them had language for before. He'd taught them that kindness doesn't have to announce itself. It doesn't need credit or applause. It just needs to show up. Every once in a while, a tourist or traveler would stop by, unaware of the diner's story. They'd walk in, order a meal, and maybe glance at the wall of handwritten notes. Most didn't think much of it at first, but something always pulled them in. Maybe it was the quiet warmth in the air. Maybe it was Lucille's gentle voice helping a kid with math homework in the back booth. Or maybe it was the laughter from Marla in the kitchen, who now hired staff from local halfway houses and trained them as if they were family. One guest left a short message on a napkin. "I didn't expect anything, but I left with hope." That napkin joined the wall too. In one corner of the diner, an older man once stood in front of Keanu's had a great letter for nearly an hour. He didn't speak to anyone, just read, again and again. Before he left, he handed Talia a folded piece of paper and walked out. She opened it after closing. It read, "I was that kind of person too once. I forgot. Thanks for reminding me." Kindness had created ripples no social media campaign ever could. And those ripples were felt in ways they might never fully understand. Talia often returned to that one quote, "He didn't change the world with power, but with patience." She realized that the greatest impact sometimes came from not reacting, but responding. Not with anger, not with shame, but with quiet conviction. Like a candle held up in a windstorm that doesn't flicker, it just burns. And Keanu had never made a single speech, never corrected the false rumors, never called out the restaurant or tried to ruin its reputation. Instead, he simply gave time, dignity, a moment of grace. He gave those who had failed him a chance to rise. And that had inspired everyone else to do the same. By the time the holidays rolled around, the diner was running a free meal program for struggling families. Volunteers filled the booths with pots of soup and homemade bread. One little girl, when asked what she was thankful for, pointed at Lucille and said, "For her, helping me read." A second grader, holding a book like it was gold. Somehow, that too traced back to Keanu's quiet visit. Talia never made a post about it. She didn't share the story with news outlets or start a trending hashtag. She just worked a little longer each night, opened a little earlier each morning, and made sure the napkin holders were full. But before she left each night, she paused at the story wall. She would look at the collection of handwritten letters and feel something rise in her chest. Not pride, exactly, more like reverence. She would run her fingers along the edge of Keanu's note, now slightly curled from months of air, and whisper to herself, "This is how you change the world." Then she would turn off the lights, one by one, as if sealing that kindness into the walls, before the morning came again. Now it's your turn. Have you ever been treated unfairly?
but chose kindness anyway? Have you ever walked away instead of fighting back, even when you had every right? Have you ever inspired someone by what you didn't say?
If this story moved you, comment below if you believe kindness can change the world. Tell us, what would you have done in Keanu's place? And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Because sometimes, the quietest voice in the room is the one that stays with you the longest. And sometimes, the strongest stand is taken while sitting over a cup of coffee, doing nothing but listening.